Hello, dear authors and invited guests. Welcome to the technical session 5B. Good afternoon to one and all present here. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to the 6th International Conference on ICT for Sustainable Development through Zoom on behalf of Team ICT for 2021 and Global Knowledge Research Foundation. We are thankful to everyone present on this platform to go along with us digitally for the conference in these unpredictable circumstances of COVID-19 and making this conference more productive. As also, we wish everyone and their family a very protected time, and we all will together pass this soon. We hope you will enjoy the last day of the session. Just before we get started, I would like to introduce you all to the chair of this session. Dr. Anil Yadav. Hello, sir. Dr. Anil Yadav is an associate professor in University Bhopal. He has more than 15 years of experience in teaching and research in the field of artificial intelligence, machine learning, Internet of Things, gaming technology, and data structure, etc. Thank you so much, sir, for chairing the session. Over to you, sir. Hello, sir. Can you hear me?
Hello, audible, ma'am?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So, participant list.
Yes.
And those candidates who have been participated in this conference, I think list you mailed me, sir.
Yes, yes. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
So we are going, sorry?
Ma'am, if you don't mind, then just inform to that candidate who are first present here.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. There's a special note for presenters that presenters would be getting 8 minutes for presentation and 2 minutes for Q&A. On 7 minutes, I will raise a gentle reminder. Also, I request you all the participants to be muted while the presentation is going on. So moving ahead with our presentation. Our first presentation is from Ms. Sakshi Gehani, and the paper title is Automated Medical Symptoms Summarization and Patient Profiling System.
Hello, ma'am. Can I start sharing my screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope I'm perfectly audible and my screen is visible.
Yes, ma'am. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon. My name is Sakshi Gehani. I'm a student of Narsi Monjee Institute of Management Studies, Mumbai. I'm here to present my work on the automated medical symptom summarization and patient profiling system that goes by the article ID 176. So as part of the project, we try to create a rule-based chatbot using the techniques of natural language processing and computer vision called the Doc Assist. So as the name suggests, this interactive chatbot tries to assist the medical practitioners by imitating or simulating a doctor's physician assistant, by which I mean that the main objective of this this chatbot or this project is to create a virtual assistant that mimics a doctor's physician assistant, and it does the job of physician assistant, which is basically to collect all the demographic and medical history of each and every patient, and to create a medical profile or portfolio for that patient, so that the doctor can have a quick perusal of that, and he can suggest, he can immediately suggest some treatment. So the motivation behind this project was that the doctors or medical practitioners who have a huge client base, who have to attend to hundreds of patients every day, they require at least 2 to 3 physician assistants to help them out in the process. Because otherwise, in the absence of such assistants, they would have to repetitively interrogate each and every patient, asking them about the same details each and every time. Moreover, they'll have to listen to the long and exhaustive descriptions of each and every medical symptom that the patient, by which the patient tries to explain his problem. This does not only waste the time and energy of the doctor, but can also take a toll on his mental health. Thus, in that way, the doctor won't really be able to efficiently attend to all the other patients afterwards. So for that, we have created this chatbot, which would help the doctors as a physician assistant. Here are certain examples of use cases where this could be used. For example, in a telemedicine app and for virtual consultations. This is really useful for, as I said, for doctors who have a huge client base and who require assistance from a medical, from a human assistant or a physician assistant. Moreover, it's good for cases where patients just need a second opinion. Also, especially for cases where the patient is not able to physically meet the doctor, be it the COVID-19 induced pandemic, or maybe due to some mobility restrictions, or maybe if the patient or the doctor is suffering from a chronic ailment or life-threatening disease. So in all such cases, such a program would be really helpful. Moreover, for international patients or for patients who come to visit the doctor from very far, this can be a boon for them, as they can quickly message the doctor their details, and the doctor can tell them if an urgent physical visit is necessary for them or not. Now, moving forward to the solution. So there are 4 main parts of this program. The first being speech recognition. So what this program does is that it interrogates the patient and asks for his basic as well as for his medical details like his name, age, gender, height, weight, etc. and the medical symptoms that he's facing, the time for which he's been facing those symptoms, a brief medical history of chronic ailments or allergies faced by the patient. And the patient has an option to dictate his answers to the chatbot. Now, this audio that that the patient inputs is then converted to text using the speech recognition module of Python, and certain data processing. It is then passed through a data processing pipeline, which then is used to extract the useful information from this text. Now, this becomes the second part of our program, extracting information details, important details from the text. Again, this part has 2 further subparts. First is extracting details such as name, age, gender, all the other demographic details of the patient. This can be done using the simple NLP techniques such as entity extraction, noun chunking, regex operations, and conflict resolution dictionaries. The other subpart is summarizing and extracting the medical symptoms and medical history of the patient from the audio. This can be again done by 2 methods. The first is, of course, using NLP techniques such as punctuating the text and then followed by entity extraction and noun chunking. The other method and the USP of this.
Sorry to interrupt you, ma'am. 1 last minute left for your presentation.
Sure, I'll just try to finish it. So the second method is the FastAI text classifier method, which is a pre-trained model on an open source data set from the website Appen. And it is a medical symptom data set on which this fast AI text classifier has been trained. And what it tries to do is that it accepts the descriptions, the text descriptions of the symptoms, and then tries to assign a category of one of those common ailments that is most likely to be diagnosed for the patient. The third part is curating all this information together and generating the patient profile in the form of a text file, which is then forwarded to the doctor. And the last part is that it allows patients to upload images or documents, supporting documents like medical diagnosis reports or previous consultation or prescriptions. All such reports or images of the skin or eye for the doctor's perusal. And these images are then passed through a GAN network, which is a super resolution generative adversarial network, which is a kind of image super resolution technique, basically, which is there to upscale the images and to enhance the quality of the images so that they do not appear blurred and the doctor can have a better view of it. Here are a few code snippets. And these are the results of the program. Next, we go ahead with the future aspirations. So I thought of integrating it with a telemedicine app or a website, if possible, with a chat support, so that the doctors, before the virtual consultation or physical consultation, they can actually have the profile, the patient's profile, right at their desk, right at their screens, and they can suggest if a physical visit is needed or not. Moreover, I wanted to attach a database to this program and a logging system so that every patient can have an account created on that database where all his records, all his medical history and consultations, documents, everything are stored over there, which makes it easier for both the doctor and the patient. Moreover, adding a language support, maybe like Hindi or any other regional language. And most importantly, an option of text input for people who are speech disabled or have a stammering problem, or maybe at that on that particular day have a sore throat and are not able to speak properly their answers. Here's a list of references that I referred during this project. And any questions?
Hello. In case of in case of cancer diagnosis, how to help your mechanism to diagnosis cancer, whether first stage, third stage, and fourth stage?
Yes, so it's the answer lies over here in the future aspirations. Basically, this program at present, it works only for the common ailments such as headache or stomach ache or shoulder pain or common skin issues, all such common ailments. It does not work for specialized problems. So like this is also one of the future aspirations that I wanted to work on that.
No. My question is that in case of cancer disease, your mechanism, I think, based on telemedicine or whatever, without human intervention, is it possible to diagnose or identify disease like cancer patient with the help of your mechanism?
I'm really sorry, sir. Your voice was breaking.
Okay, fine.
I'm really sorry, but what I understood, you were trying to say that for cancer patients, if they explain their symptoms, would it be able to recognize that? Am I right?
Okay.
Hello.
Over to you, ma'am. Hello.
Hello. So I hope there are no more questions. So should I move ahead with our next presentation? Our next presentation. Okay.
Feature Jyoti Ji Bode.
Good afternoon, sir and ma'am. I'm sharing my presentation. Am I audible, ma'am?
Sure. Yes. Yes.
Ma'am, if you allow next participant until unless
Yes, sir. Doing same. Ma'am, please be ready with your presentation. Till that, we are moving ahead with our next presentation.
Vedant Modi.
Okay, ma'am.
Yes, our next presentation is from Mr. Vedant Modi, and the paper title is Detection and Classification of Diseases and Maturity of Dragon Fruits.
Right, you can see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah, visual.
Yes. Good afternoon to all the panelists. I'm Vedant Modi, and I'm presenting a paper, Detection and Classification of Diseases and Maturity of Dragon Fruits. I'm one of the 5 co-authors of this paper, which includes Professor Roshali Kulkarni, Professor Pranali Kosamkar, Chanvi Singh, Purva Ingle, and I, Vedant Modi. This is a brief overview of what we're going to go over today. I'll introduce the topic, give you a brief what motivated us to do this project, the literature survey that we did and the research gap that we observed, and the problem statement that we derived from it, our system architecture and proposed methodology to deal with the problem, and the image processing that we will perform on a data set before I conclude. To introduce the topic, the Indian economy is largely dependent on agriculture, and a huge population of India rely on agriculture for its sustenance. Just to give a one stat, about 42% of the Indian workforce is employed in agriculture, but despite that, it contributes to only about 16% of India's GDP. This tells us about how much scope there is for improvement in this sector. Today in India, the grading of fruits and vegetables is still done manually and using traditional methods, which are prone to individual bias, misjudgment, and wariness, and often lead to faulty grading of fruits and vegetables. Moreover, dragon fruits are very diverse in their form and shape, and which makes it especially difficult to grade dragon fruits manually. Dragon fruits are a very new crop in the Indian agricultural sector. Over 80% of the cultivated area of dragon fruits in India has been sown in the previous 18 months. They have a high domestic and international demand and are used for export. They are grown perennially. They have a high antioxidant, vitamin, and mineral content. And they are grown easily in degraded and drought-prone areas, which make it a very desirable crops for farmers today. But however, there's one drawback of using dragon fruits, which is the prolonged and premature harvesting of the fruit does result in food decay. And moreover, the farmers are not trained in farming dragon fruits. And to deal with this, we propose the use of region-based convolutional neural networks, which is a deep learning algorithm to detect and classify the common dragon fruit diseases and also classify the majority of dragon fruits. I'll briefly go over the literature survey that we did. One of the papers that we did read was use mask RCNN, which is the algorithm we propose, on over 2,000 images of various fruits. This gave them an excellent accuracy of greater than 95%. But however, they had a slower speed due to the high computational power. But we believe the high accuracy does offset the drawback of the slower speed. Another paper compared one of the best algorithms, which is YOLO with RCNN. In this case, the RCNN did give a higher accuracy than YOLO itself, which was faster. But in terms of accuracy, RCNN was the winner. Another paper that we did read classified dragon fruits based on the maturity using a machine learning algorithm called as naive-Bayes classifier. It gave them a relatively low accuracy of 86%, and we believe this might be due to the small data set of 150 images. This leads us to the research gap that we observed. Firstly, there's a lack of effective training samples with labels. To the best of our knowledge, we did not find a freely available and a large enough labeled data set of dragon fruits. Frequently, data sets include a large number of photographs of various plant species with diseases against a simple backdrop and not a real world background for realistic scenarios. Moreover, some algorithms also fail to segment relevant features required for the classification of certain classes. We believe this accuracy can be improved by dealing with the problems in the images of real-time database. And this is because of the variation in temperature, the shadows, overlapping of leaves, and also the presence of multiple objects. Another factor that we must take into consideration is also the model's ability to detect diseases in crops at different stages of the disease growth. And finally, there's simply not enough work that has been done on dragon fruits in the past. Using this, we framed a problem statement, which is briefly detection and classification of diseases and maturity of dragon fruits. We use a technology of region-based convolutional neural networks, RCNN, to classify and detect diseases that plague the dragon fruit, which are mainly anthracnose, brown spots, and stem rots. We also wish to classify the fruits based on the maturity. This leads us to our system architecture. So the system architecture consists of 3 main steps, which have been subdivided here. In the first step, we identify a number of regions of interest, which are the bounding box candidates. So suppose if we have an infected crop, infected fruit, our region of interest will be the infected part of the fruit. So we create the bounding boxes using this process, which is called selective search. We move ahead to the second step, which is a large convolutional neural network to extract features from each region. So we make regions of interest using bounding selective search, and we run the CNN on each region. And the final step uses the SVM classifier for the classification of the region, whether it is diseased or not diseased, and whether it's mature or raw, and also to predict which disease it is. So this is a further into detail of our model. So we pre-train the CNN for N classes. We use.
Sorry to interrupt,
right.
but you have left 1 last minute for your presentation. Kindly conclude.
All right, I'll just move ahead. Our image processing steps consists of 3 main feature selection consists of 3 main parts: color statistical features, shape feature extraction, and defect detection. The performance metrics include accuracy, precision, recall, F1 and confusion matrix. We believe these 5 will give us a good overview of how well a model performs. As for the data set, this was a primary hurdle due to the unforeseen lockdown in Maharashtra. But currently, we have visited a farm in Baramati several times and collected a data set of over 2,700 images, which includes ripe and raw dragon fruits, and which includes images of dragon fruits with defects and without defects. And here are a few samples from our data set, just a few samples. To conclude, there's a heavy focus on each stage of the dragon fruit's development, because if we harvest the fruit too early or too late, this does result in food deterioration, and also harvesting a raw or a ripe fruit leads to the same result. This has a prolonged effect on India's economic growth because it is dependent on agriculture. We believe our CNN model will give us better accuracy and will help the farmers in the long run. These are the references that we have cited in our paper, and I'm open to any questions that you might have.
So what formulation used for creating new model for disease diagnosis in dragon fruits? I think you are not mentioned in your paper.
I'm sorry, sirs. Could you repeat the question?
What formulation used for creating new model? Because during training session you have to model. So in dragon fruits disease diagnosis.
Right, sir. So we are using RCNN, region-based convolutional neural network. So how this works is it's a new convolutional neural network. It's a CNN model. But additionally, we create several bounding boxes. So if you have a fruit, the fruit will be one bounding box. The disease part of the fruit will be another bounding box. And we run the CNN on each bounding box. So although this does make the system a bit slow, we still believe the higher accuracy will offset the disadvantage of a slower system.
And my last question, what is targeted feature to train the model? You have decided for training in case of CNN dragon fruit feature.
Right.
Yeah.
So for the feature selection, we will use the color statistical features, which include the color mean, the skewness, and the standard deviation. Also, we will extract the shape features and the defect detection. So as for the defect detection, we will use a defect ratio, the defect medial axis length, and also the defect perimeter as the basic geometrical features.
Okay, fine. Thank you. Over to you. Next.
Thank you so much, Mr. Vedant. Hello, Ms. Jyoti. If you are
Thank you.
ready with your presentation, you can go ahead.
Yes, ma'am, I'm ready. Just wait.
Yes. Please share the screen and continue. Hello, ma'am. You can click the slideshow and start the same. Yes, from beginning or whatever. Yeah. Perfect. Please start. Hello, ma'am. Ma'am, you are on mute.
Okay, can you hear me, ma'am?
Now, yes. Please start.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so these are the contents of my presentation. Objective, abstract, what is age, why automatic grading of PowerPoint presentation, then system architecture, then we'll see the features that we have extracted, then model evaluation, and finally I will conclude my presentation. So these are the objectives of my presentation. Here we are going to evaluate students' effort used for preparing PowerPoint presentation. And we are going to reduce the assessment related issues for the teacher like inaccuracies and inconsistency, and to provide feedback to the students so they can improve their PowerPoint presentation. As in our paper, we have used Python PPTX library to extract features present from the PowerPoint presentation slides, and machine learning techniques are used to grade their presentation. And in order to reduce the dimensionality of the features, we have used a tree-based feature selection approach to remove the least important features. And we have used dimensionality reduction technique like linear discriminant analysis to improve the performance of the machine learning model. So first is what is age? Age is the automated grading of the essay. So essay type of evaluation is a kind of assessment where teachers have to evaluate extensive type of work done by the student, like assessing their answer sheet, assessing their programming assignment, then research article, then PowerPoint presentation. Such a kind of work is the essay. So evaluation process is the subjective lead to inaccuracy and consideration variation in grading due to the subjectivity of the teachers or the favorism for particular student. So as we have gone through the literature and we found that age is developed to automatically review the research article, to automatically grade programming assignments, and to automatically grade short and long answers of the examination. So lot of research is found about the grading the short answers of the examination. And so it is not only done in the English language, but for other natural languages also, like Indonesian, Chinese, Arabic, Punjabi, and Japanese language, this automatic grading is found. So here we are here to discuss about the automatic grading of the PowerPoint presentation. So as we know that presentation is used to present the ideas, plan, and strategy used by the student in their project, seminar, or their course and their conference paper. So presentation, if you see, the presentation has both technical and non-technical content. So technical contents, they represent the expertise of that particular students in his field or in his work, and non-technical aspect is about the how he has done the presentation. So what features of the presentation he has used. So here, as the evaluator is our teacher, it depends, and its evaluation of this PowerPoint presentation, it depends on the evaluator's knowledge, experience, and mindset. So as in order to design the PowerPoint presentation, so it is very much important to provide the feedback to the student so that they can improve it. But it will be very much hectic for the teacher to provide the feedback to the large group of the students. So evaluating presentation is a challenging task because of its subjective assessment, and it is a time-consuming mechanical activity. So to overcome this challenge, here we have presented automated grading of the PowerPoint presentation. So our approach is it is based on, as whenever we are going for any machine learning technique, so features are very much important. So as we have gone through the literature and no work is found about the grading the PowerPoint slides. So no data set were available. So what we have done by using Python PPTX library, we have extracted feature that is contributing for the presentation quality of the PowerPoint slides. So as here, this is the reason that many researchers believe that PowerPoint slides are minor part during the assessment of the presentation, and as because of that, no work is found on this. We have developed system on the data set of existing 100 PowerPoint slides prepared by our students for their project and seminar work, and we have taken the grade assigned by the examiners. So here the examiners are not aware about the feature that we are going to consider for that. So randomly whatever the grade they have assigned, so that we have taken it as the output, and the features we have extracted for this 100 PowerPoint slides, that those were prepared for their project and seminar from third year and B class. So here we have retrieved the features corresponding to photos, means presence of the images, figures, text, charts, graphs, tables. So like 23 features we have extracted from the PowerPoint slide. Those were capturing numerous aspects that improve the presentation quality. So this is our system architecture. So here we can see that there are these thick lines, thick solid line, it represents the training process, and this dotted line represent the testing process. So here we can see that PowerPoint slides features are extracted, and for that we have designed the programming by using the Python PPTX. And after that, further, in order to remove the least important feature, we have used this extra tree classifier from the Python and linear discriminant analysis technique. And after that, whatever the machine learning model we got, so we have given this ungraded PowerPoint presentation to this machine learning model, and we got the grade for that unseen PowerPoint presentation. So this is our overall architecture of our system. So we have extracted this much of feature related with the graphics, text appearance, footer, and hyperlink. And here we can see that this image, chart, table, text box, then text related maximum, minimum font size, whether it is bold, underline, italic, number of font types, size, and number of colors used, then uses of the footer, then presence of the slide number, then date, hyperlinks, number of presentation slides used for the presentation. And see here, depending on these features, the output label is like excellent, very good, good, and fair. So we have categorized it into 4 classes. So this is our model evaluation. Here we can see this accuracy is shown here.
Ma'am, 1 last minute left for your presentation.
Yes, ma'am, I will conclude within that. So here we have used this 4 machine learning model, that is decision tree, support vector machine, multi-layer perceptron, and naive-Bayes classifier. So here we can see that when we have used all the features without any feature reduction, so we got the 100% accuracy for decision tree and SVM. But after that, in order to improve performance of this MLP and NP, we have used this trees-based feature reduction. So in this, we have removed the least important feature. Those were not contributed to categorize the PowerPoint presentation slides into like excellent, good, and average, like in category. So here we can see that after applying this, here we multi-layer perceptron, for this we got the 100% accuracy. And further, we have applied this linear discriminant analysis to remove the correlated features. So here we got this 100% accuracy for the naive-Bayes classifier. So in this way, by applying this feature reduction techniques, we have got the 100% accuracy for all these classifiers. And this is the precision recall and F1 score. This is precision table, recall table, and F1 score table for our machine learning model. And it is also showing the same thing. When we were applied this feature means what, tree-based feature reduction, and after that LDA-based feature reduction, we got the one precision for every machine learning model. And same for the recall, we got the one value, and here also we got the one value for the F1 score. So conclusions, we have implemented technique in which PowerPoint presentation skill of the student can be assessed using computer-based automated techniques. We have implemented a feature extraction program using Python PPTX library to identify set of useful feature to determine the presentation quality. So using this feature extraction program, we have developed small data set to enable the development of the machine learning techniques. And unnecessary features are removed using tree-based feature selection method. And also we have used the linear discriminant analysis technique to do dimensionality reduction. So after applying feature selection and dimensionality reduction technique, we have achieved 100% accuracy for all the classifier to predict the grade of the PowerPoint presentation. So these are the, I have used number of references, so some are listed here. Thank you. So any questions, ma'am and sir?
Dimensional reduction is supervised or unsupervised? You are seeing here dimensional reduction used for better result. So I think you have used LDA algorithm. Okay, LDA is part of supervised learning. And
Yes.
recently you are saying just for result enhancement, you will able to do dependency reduction. That means PCA. Okay.
Yes.
So just justify how is it possible?
Which one, sir?
Dependency reduction.
Sir, dimensionality reduction. So here actually means so here actually we have used tree-based classifier. So in that it is identifying the least important features. So here suppose. So here as an example, actually that perfect exam is not open here. Will open will come. Okay, sir. Actually, in that the whatever the least important feature, that means so the graph is shown when we are doing this tree-based classifier. So here the importance of that feature is shown less. Okay, and so I have removed those features from that, and in this way performance is improved. And for the linear discriminant analysis, I have directly taken the means from the scikit-learn discriminant analysis. And I have given my input. And actually, we will see the basic theory of the linear discriminant analysis is that it creates the new axis and project information on it. And because of that, it minimizes the variance and maximize the distance.
Just 1 minute. Okay. Just can you tell me my last question from my end? Feature engineering and feature extraction, both are same or different? Just clear.
Sir, we can't say like this, feature engineering and feature extraction. Actually, feature engineering means what? It is feature selection, feature extraction, then like
okay,
that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Ma'am, over to you.
Thank you so much. And our next presentation is from Ms. Shreya Khandekar, and the paper title is Automatic HTML Code Generation Using Image Processing.
Okay. Is the screen visible?
Not yet, ma'am.
Okay. Now?
Yes, now it is visible.
Okay. Sure. Is it visible, right?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. Sure. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Shreya Khandekar from PVJ COET, and my team is glad to be a part of this conference. Thank you for accepting our paper in ICT 4SD. I would like to thank and appreciate the efforts of my team. All work really hard and help in every possible way. This project and paperwork is done by Tejashri Pathak, Shraddha Korde, Rituja Kulkarni, Satish Kamble, and me. And our paper title is Automatic HTML Code Generation Using Image Processing. So now we will see the agenda of our system. We are presenting an approach to generate the code automatically from the given input image. Our system will allow even non-technical people to create the application, removing need of a developer for creating simple web page or one Google form for getting the HTML code. System is also helpful in reducing time and will also be affordable. Now we'll see the introduction to HTML code generation. As we all know, to build any website, first thing come in mind is its design, and everyone has their own perspective for that. Before coding, developer expects and visualize the final website to how it will look like, and draws mockups for the web pages either by hand or using graphic design tool. Having friendly user interface will also increase the interaction of user. So CNN is a convolutional neural network and is a deep learning algorithm which can take input image and assign importance to various objects in image and is able to differentiate one from the other. We have created one model using CNN to recognize the objects. Also, system is helpful in reducing time and cost effective. Now we will see the algorithms that we have used in our system. So Otsu's algorithm. So in computer vision and image processing, Otsu's method is used to perform automatic image thresholding. So thresholding is a type of an image segmentation that is grayscale to binary image. Threshold is determined by minimizing intra-class intensity variance or equivalently by maximizing the inter-class variance. It returns single intensity threshold that separate pixels into two classes, which is background and foreground. Now we'll see the HTML builder algorithm. So this is used to generate the HTML code. So in the first step, we create template for the header and footer. Then it will detect total item on each row with the coordinates of the components. After that, it maps the label of the component to their template code. And in the end, the body section, HTML code is generated. Finally, footer, header, body section is combined. The model. So we have created one model using CNN. A convolutional layer convert pixel information to vector, and pooling layer finds relevant features. ReLU for passing the information between the neural network layers. Dropout used to discard some pixels to avoid overfitting. Flattening converts data in single feature array called final feature vector, and dense layer to give the output label. Also, we have used Adams optimizer for the increasing training speed, and also categorical cross entropy for loss calculation. So literature survey. So we studied various papers related to our topic and then came up with some study. In the paper called Morphological Operations for the Image Processing, idea was to study imperfections in structure of image. In paper named Algorithms of Image Classification based on CNN, study of CNN and ANN for classification using optimizers has been done. In the paper related to Bootstrap framework called Bootstrap Web Development, study of Bootstrap and usage has been done. In paper named Sketch2Code, which is also our base paper for this project, they had used a lot of Microsoft AI libraries. Instead, we have used TensorFlow, Keras, and various other libraries, and also algorithms like Otsu and HTML builder algorithm. Motivation. So we got this idea of developing this project by Microsoft Sketch2Code and Pix2Code, and we aim to achieve maximum accuracy in detecting important features and also to design the web page within few minutes. It also time efficient and cost efficient. Now see the architecture diagram. First, user take the image and then it goes to the morphological transformation. In that, object detection and contour detection is done. After that, it passes to the object cropping. In that, it will trim that particular object. After that, it passes to the deep learning. So in the deep learning, it recognizes specific objects and performs CNN algorithm on that object. And finally, in the HTML builder module, HTML code gets generated. Software tools. So we have used Bootstrap framework. As we all know, it's an open source, free CSS framework support is there, and also device friendly. It includes CNN and optional CSS and optional JavaScript supported plugins. It is also faster in web development. And we chose Python IDE because it is used for Python programming, and it has code assistant facilities like code recommendations, syntax, error highlighting, supports Matplotlib, NumPy, SciPy, Keras. So we chose this. Now I'll explain the methodology. So we have created an web app which is converting image directly.
Hello,
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt. One last minute left for your presentation.
Okay, sure. I will conclude fast. So image directly to HTML code to obtain the desired web page. For that, we are using deep learning methods to maximize the performance. We restricted our system to work on only images which are drawn with a dark marker with a white background. So in order to achieve this, we have, I can explain it in 3 steps. So first, getting threshold image and crop those images, then classifying objects, and then assigning labels using model and getting HTML code. So this is the implementation. So in the left-hand side, we can see the input image, and the user has to use the sign convention to get the desired output as mentioned in the right-hand side. Okay. To conclude, I can say we tried to present an approach that will convert the input sketch given by user into a corresponding HTML code with the minimum time and development cost. Our system detects elements such as default text, input box, checkbox, dropdown, and button. These are some references that along with a literature survey while we're implementing the project, we gone through this. And yes. Thank you so much for listening patiently. And once again, thank you for this great opportunity. You have any questions for me?
Automated HTML code generated using, I think, image processing. So
Yes.
I want to know what's your contribution regarding what innovative algorithm you are finding HTML code generation.
Okay, so first of all, we did this research and we got to know that Otsu's algorithm is best for thresholding. So thresholding can convert the image into a binary image. And after that, we have masked the that image so that after cropping those elements, like if we, I can explain through this implementation. So for the line, we have used like for line, we have used sign convention. So sign convention will detect those things like for line.
Just one minute. My question in short, what algorithm, what machine ML algorithm, RDL, both are different. If you have using deep learning algorithm, then tell me and how to work. Just simple 1 or 50 seconds.
Okay, so we have developed one model. So for that model, we have used line, then rectangle, square, inverted rectangle, and all those things we have kept that into a model. And we are using our own CNN model for classification of images. We have created one for that.
Okay, and last question, TensorFlow, TensorFlow and Python.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think you are using TensorFlow or Python. So not clear in your work, but use broadly in terms of your work. Okay, thank you. Over to you, ma'am.
Yes, thank you so
So
much.
we have used Keras.
Okay.
Sure.
Yeah, no, please continue. Okay, thank you so much. Our next presentation is from Ms. Nalini Maitre, and the paper title is Rethinking Access Control Mechanism for Eubiotics Computing.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Please let me share my screen.
Sure, ma'am.
Is my screen visible, ma'am?
Yes, yes, it is. Please go ahead.
Okay. Good afternoon, all. This is Nalini Maitre. I'm going to present my paper titled Rethinking Access Control Mechanism for Ubiquitous Computing, along with my co-authors A.V. Deshpande and Parikshit Mahalle. This is the outline of my presentation. Introduction. To begin with, ubiquitous computing, or simply Ubicom, it is the term given to third era of modern computing, which followed by mainframes era and personal computers era. So according to Mark Weger, ubiquitous computing, it is the method of enhancing computer use by making many computers available throughout the physical environment, but by making them effectively invisible to the user. Actually, it facilitates embedding of computational capability into everyday objects to make them communicate and perform certain useful tasks, which is we can consider concept of IoT. So computing is basically integrated into everyday objects rather than being associated with specific devices, which we call as computers. So Ubicom devices, they are network connected and constantly available. Basically, internet is inherent infrastructure of ubiquitous computing, which offers anytime, anywhere, anything type of computing. Now, for my work, we are going to consider a challenge of authorization and access control in this environment. We all know what authentication is. Basically, it verifies users' identity, who they claim to be. But in case of authorization, it is a further step, which is the verification process to check whether a requester is permitted to do certain action or not, or to use certain resource or not. And access control, it is the selective restriction of access to resources, meaning that it guarantees users' privacy, confidentiality, integrity, and accessibility, which are the basic security requirements for granting access to resources. So access control, it is a basic security method that regulates use of resources in the system. And we are going to address challenge of access control in ubiquitous environment. Next, significance and background. In this case, we will first consider characteristics of this UbiComp environment. They are like resource constrained devices. Resource constrained devices in the sense that they have limited energy, limited computing power, memory, etc. Dynamic and heterogeneous execution environment, wherein set of users, devices, maybe hardware, software, and even operating systems in this environment, they are highly dynamic and they change frequently. Next characteristic is fluctuating usage environment. Devices and users, they are mobile or moving, and devices, they are continuously connecting and disconnecting to the network. And as we have seen, it is offering us invisible computing. So vision of this UbiComp is to have invisible computing, meaning that computers will exist everywhere and devices with networking and processing capabilities, they will embed themselves within the fabric of our physical environments. So at the same time, they will invisible to end users. So this is challenging. So security and privacy challenges are more as compared to traditional computing environment. So the information exchange between device to device in this environment is more vulnerable due to exposed nature of wireless communication. In this environment, objects, they do interact across multiple organizational boundaries, adaptive services, and even applications they have emerged for this particular environment, especially the case of IoT is. Hence, there exists a requirement for context-aware adaptive security, and access control is one such basic security method that regulates the use of resources. So yes, these are the challenges in UbiComp. If we look at the present state of access control in this environment, the security issues in this environment are like access to the resources based on contextual information. So there are several security issues that needs to be addressed in this environment. So one of them is access based on context information. Next is access in a collaborative environment. Basically, there is no controlling authority centralized present in this environment. Nature of communication is collaborative in this case. So one of the requirement is access control in a collaborative environment. Then decentralized administration. So as environment itself is a collaborative, there is a administration which is decentralized in nature, and access for different users and devices also is one of the security issues while applying, security in ubiquitous computing. Even though context awareness has emerged in the discussion in various fields these days, however, most of the today's context-sensitive systems and applications, they are still there in their early stages, and they use only atomic context information like just location or time or just identity either of device or user, something like that. So there are certain other requirements also. Furthermore, traditional access control models like ACL, DAC, MAC are bad. They do have their shortcomings also. Access control list, ACL, it refers to fixed list of permissions associated with the system resources. Discretionary, in that case, authorization policies, they do control access based on identity of the requester. In mandatory access control, policies control access is based on mandatory regulations that are determined by certain central authority. And in role-based policies, they control access depending on the role that users have within the systems and on the rules stating what accesses are allowed to users in a given roles. So with these requirements, there are certain shortcomings, like they are static in nature. Traditional access control models are static in nature. They make use of objects, static attributes to do access control decisions. They are not capable of acquiring contextual information from objects and their surrounding environments, and they are also unable to respond to changes in the context attributes. So for this, we have done a literature survey, and this slide presents state of the art of that literature survey. We have conducted literature survey by considering 3 features: extensibility of the access control model, whether it's context aware or not, and whether trust between devices is considered or not. So here extensibility refers to dynamically generated constraints due to additional of new devices with smart environment, and context is any information related to the entity in communication, and trust it is basically extent between devices to which one device is willing to depend on other devices. Basically, concept of trust is a novel concept here, which effectively evaluates relationship between devices, and which we are going to use to have access control decisions. So this trust management is new thing, and additional derived context we are going to make use to have new access control mechanism. So that is novelty in our contribution. So with this, the gap identified is like in table shown on earlier slide, it shows various access control models for IoT and UBCOM.
Sorry to interrupt, ma'am. 1 last minute left for your presentation. Kindly conclude.
Okay. So I would like to go to this slide, which is my proposed access control method, which has 3 main functional components: trust manager, context manager, and access control module. In trust manager, trust is calculated, which helps in decision making to identify risk. And we are going to consider multi values like behavior of the devices, recommendation value between devices, and uncertainty to calculate the trust. In context manager, we are going to derive context using machine learning concept. Again, that is certain novel idea in our work. So this context manager, it senses various context and will derive group of devices. So classification concept of machine learning, we are going to use to group devices in the form of constrained devices, powerful devices, semi-powerful devices, and accordingly access control policies will be designed for our access control model. So this is proposed access control model, which maps mapping of access rights with access rules, and authorization decision making will be taken place by considering access context manager and trust manager. So this is conclusion. Our proposed approach considers the use of trust relationships amongst devices and their high level context in policy designing and decision making. Devices are enabled to obtain high level context through machine learning by processing a rich data set about the devices and their networking environment, and the use of machine learning is going to be a saline feature of our proposed framework, and which is quite suitable for UBCOM. Thank you. These are a few of the references, though there are many, but these are representative. Thank you all.
Okay. Policy designing and policy decision making system. So I think it's a play important role for making the thinking in ubiquitous computing. So you know, so what algorithm like Q-learning or SARSA or Markov decision process, what methodology used for policy decision making?
In our case, for context deriving, we are going to make use of clustering. Clustering, we are going to classify devices. To classify devices at runtime, we are using machine learning to cluster them together.
No, machine learning. So machine learning is not machine learning is a collection of different type of learning technique. So yes. What algorithm use for, because your topic based on this thinking assess through ubiquitous computing. So ubiquitous computing actually based on for polynomial type memory. Okay, not based on linear memory. So these type of complex problem to solve ubiquitous computing. So my question is rethinking data or rethinking assets. So in that time you have huge amount of data. So first thing you have to look up table. You know lookup table? What is lookup table and why we are using lookup table in ubiquitous computing? You know?
Sir, my topic is access control, accessing decision of accessing resources is based on access control mechanism, and to facilitate access control policies, we are making use of context and trust relationships. So for context deriving, we are only using machine learning, nowhere else. For decision making, we are not using machine learning. We are using machine learning for deriving context, sir. And for that, we are grouping devices, and to group them, we have used clustering method in our work. So I'm not getting what exactly.
Okay, but you are using policy designing and decision making mechanism. So my question, policy designing. So your what algorithm used for making this?
We have not used machine learning for policy designing. We have used machine learning for context deriving.
Your I think just your inventiveness in this paper, I think just trial and hit method or concept. Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Yes,
Over
sir.
to you. Okay.
Thank you so much, Ms. Nalini. Our next presentation is from Mr. Vivek John Sudhakar, and the paper title URL detection and vulnerability assessment of web applications using IVS attributes with XAI.
Hello, am I audible clearly?
Yes.
Is my screen visible?
Yes, yes, it is. Please go ahead.
Thank you. So, good afternoon, everyone. So, my topic is phishing URL detection and vulnerability assessment of web applications using IVS attributes. So, the table of contents. So, the introduction. So, basically, the main form methods attackers use in compromising any application or in any cyber attack is either through phishing, which is sending tricking users into clicking some malicious link, or by compromising existing web vulnerabilities which are present in web applications. And the most common type of vulnerabilities which are compromised are input validation based vulnerabilities. So, and the three most common types of vulnerabilities in this class are SQL injection, cross-site scripting, and file inclusion vulnerabilities. So, so this paper is focused on tackling these two issues. So the overall objectives were to detect tiny URLs as well as normal phishing URLs without opening the actual link. And the main part is to detect these, focusing on these three vulnerabilities, which is input validation based vulnerabilities, to detect them using something known as IVS attributes and passing them through a machine learning model. So we focus on PHP code because that is the most common server-side code which is used nowadays. And IVS stands for input validation and sanitization. Okay, so this is the overall architecture. So if for a phishing URL is the first part, where given a URL, we check if it is first live by sending a GET request. And then if it is, we also get the final response to check if it is a shortened URL or not. After that, we pass it through our SVM model to classify if it is phishing or not, and also output some relevant information like who is information for the user. And for vulnerability detection, so given a PHP source code, what we do is first, the normal methods which is used is taint analysis. But so we are trying to make it a little bit more explainable and check a new approach. So for the first step, we generate a AST, abstract syntax tree, from the source code. And this is used just to get any sensitive sources or sinks, which are possible places from where input data is come from the user. And we display that. And the next important module is where we extract these IVS attributes. And the whole concept is that this input validation vulnerabilities occur because input data gotten from a user is not sanitized properly by the developer before sent through the backend for processing. So we try to identify certain attributes like inbuilt functions which are used for these input for sanitization. Are they being called or not, using string matching, and other IVS attributes like is the database being accessed, is the cookie file being accessed. So we extract a set of 17 attributes which are binary attributes, whether they are present or not. And we get an array of these attributes from the given source code as input. And these attributes are then passed through an XGBoost ML model. And there are three models in parallel for SQL injection, XSS, and for file inclusion. And these models predict output a probability of the presence or absence of these vulnerabilities in the source code. Next, this array is also sent to an explainable AI module, which is for this we use the SHAP explainer, which gives an explanation of this prediction. Since we are using attributes, like which attribute has played a majority role in the given output, and which the importance of each attribute is given through this explainable AI module. So these are the different modules used. So for the URL analysis, given a URL, just check if it exists or not, and then expand it if it is a tiny URL and pass it through the SVM model. So for code analysis, the first part, we get the PHP source code, which is the input. So we need to find vulnerabilities in this source code. So for that, we get an abstract syntax tree, and from the pass this abstract syntax tree to identify sensitive sources where, which are places where user data can come into the code, and we display it to the user. And we also use this as a one of the attributes in the IVS attributes. The next is the code analysis and parsing the code to extract these IVS attributes. So here we check for one set of IVS attributes are the presence of other inbuilt sanitization functions are being used, and a certain other IVS attributes such as a DB access and cookie file access. These are then extracted as a binary array and passed to an XGBoost ML model, which then gives probabilities for the presence of these three vulnerabilities: SQL injection, XSS, and file inclusion. It is then also sent to an explainable AI module, which shows the user the explanation of this prediction, which is basically the feature importances, and also based on which the presence of which feature the model has predicted the presence or absence. So this is the module description for that. So for example, output would be for the first module given a phishing URL. We also after checking if it exists, we display relevant information, that is who is information, and then predict if it is a phishing URL or not. And for source code, once we obtain the source code, as you can see, like the source code is listed in the left-hand side. And first we get an abstract syntax tree and then parse it to get possible sources and sinks. So as you can see, there's a get which is used. This is a possible source in the file. From that, user data can be given. So given with the line number, this also helps the developer see where possible data can enter. And this is also one of the initial attributes needed to show that input validation vulnerabilities can be present. Next, we get a list of all the IVS attributes. As you can see, like cookie file, if it's accessed or not, if there is database access, and plus also like certain functions like HTML entities, like the 8th attribute, they are inbuilt functions which are used for input sanitization. Are they being called in the code? So this gives a binary array, which is then passed through a ML model where the output of probabilities of the presence or absence is given. And the explainable AI model is also used to show first the model, what the model has learned, but more importantly, given a prediction, like which feature has caused the model to predict the presence of a vulnerability. As can be seen here, like feature 16, which is present, causes it to move greatly to the right-hand side of a base value, which the model fixes. And since the probability has gone above 0.5, it shows the presence of a vulnerability. So the data set used is we had to compile our own data set from the SAR test suite. However, from SQL injection, as can be seen, the number of classes in the negative class is much less than the positive class. So these are the evaluation metrics which we have used to evaluate our model. So for the ML model, we use precision, recall, and accuracy. And since it is outputs a probability for a binary outcome, we have used log loss to evaluate the model. So for phishing URL detection, as you can see, an SVM model has performed extremely well.
Sorry to interrupt. One last minute left for your presentation. Kindly conclude.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so for cross-site scripting, as you can see, the precision and recall is 61% and 62%. This is because the what we found out was using the 17 attributes, it was a very sparse results which we got. So we can apply, include more cross-site scripting specific attributes for this to improve these results, such as checking for more specific functions, such as raw URL encoder and such. For SQL vulnerability detection, as can be seen, the precision and recall is low, 16% and 21%, but the accuracy is 82%. This is again because of the huge imbalance in class data set. And as can be seen, the true negatives are actually high, but however, since the number of samples in the positive class is also low, so
hello?
I think someone else is sharing this.
Sorry, hello, Mr. Abdul. Please, your turn is not arrived yet. Please wait after this presentation. I'll announce your name. Hello, Vivek. Please start. Yeah. Yes.
Is it visible? Yeah.
Yes, yes. Please continue.
So this is the reason for the accuracy being extremely high. So this can again be rectified by improving, getting a more detailed data set for SQL injection. And for file inclusion, as you can see, the precision is 57% and accuracy of 66%. And finally, this is a summary and the log loss curves. If we take a look for each model, as you can see for XSS cross-site scripting, the log loss in the test data set is higher than the trained data set. So this shows that there's a slight overfitting which occurs. For SQLi, this is not the case. And for file inclusion, the test log loss is much lower than the trained data set. So a conclusion is this approach of using IBS attributes is feasible and can be improved upon to help in vulnerability detection and also making it more explainable to the use of explainable AI. And to do these things, we would have to add research more specific attributes which can be used, and a more comprehensive and detailed data set will have to be compiled. Yeah, these are the references. That's it. Thank you.
Okay. How to find accuracy?
Sorry, sir, how to find?
How to find accuracy? You have told here on the basis of imbalanced data. So, how is it possible to evaluate accuracy without any formulation or any kind of equation or model?
So for accuracy, we get it from the confusion matrix which is used. So from true positives and true negatives, we can calculate the true positive, true negative, false positive, false negative. And from there, we calculate the accuracy of the XGBoost model which is used.
Okay, my second question, what algorithm you use for feature selection for prediction?
So for features, we have specified our own unique IDS attributes, and we extract it from the source code by parsing through the source code, either string matching or for DB access, like a specific MySQL.
No, I think you have huge amount of data set for prediction, because you have already
that data set is only source code. So again, the data set we had to extract the features and prepare it. And the same IBS features.
I got it. If we want to know, just my last question, is
yes,
what your innovativeness or what your contribution in terms of unique?
So in terms of unique.
Major contribution in your paper. Just yeah.
So my contribution, as in like what is new in the paper.
I think just a evolution on the basis of some existing data set and so on. And you predict.
So data set, so again, like using these IBS attributes does not much work at all. There's only one paper which has been done only for SQL injection. So this whole concept is a bit new. So we've used a new ML model and done it for all 3 input validation and sanitization based vulnerabilities. So as a general category, that's why we use XSS, SQLi, and file inclusion. And using explainable AI. So explainable AI used for to explain a prediction like in this field has not been done before. So
my question is what algorithm means? Okay, fine. Thank you. Ma'am, over to you.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, Mr. Vivek. Our next presentation is from Mr. Abdul Ghani Kabede. I'm sorry if I mispronunciation. And the paper title is Student Engagement Awareness Dashboard for Asynchronous E-Learning Environment. Hello, Mr. Abdul. Hello, Mr. Abdul, are you there?
I'm yeah. My screen, right, madam?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm Abdul Ghani Wagjira. I'm presenting conference paper titled Student Engagement Awareness Dashboard for Asynchronous E-Learning Environment under the guidance of Dr. Sabbat Acharya from Department of Computer Science and Engineering, Indian Institute of Technology.
I guess your screen is not clearly visible.
My contents are introduction, literature review, proposed student engagement prediction. Okay, madam. And now, what about now, madam? Is that okay? And now correct, madam?
It's visible. Anil sir, can you see it clearly? Or am I the only?
Not visible.
Not visible clearly. It blurs the screen. It is blurred.
It is not visible, madam?
Ma'am, I think language is not okay.
Please continue.
Shall I make it PDF or?
Okay, continue.
Shall I continue?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, please continue.
Okay, madam. So my contents are introduction, literature review, proposed student engagement prediction model, and proposed visualizer. Is a platform which allows learners to attend course online, but the asynchronous part of e-learning has a disadvantage as students feel isolated. And this feeling of isolation, because of the absence of the teacher physically, the teacher is not present, so monitoring a student for engagement is a challenge. And student engagement is about students putting time, energy, thought, and effort and feelings into their learning. That's why engagement is the key factor for successful learning. Engagement prediction models coupled with visualization system can help instructors student engagement, and tracking engagement while the student is learning allows intervention at an appropriate time. Visualizing data helps stakeholders easily see trends to understand what has been happening. That is yes. Instructors are overwhelmed by data reports in the online courses. This is one challenge. And yes, sir. Sorry. Shall I continue?
Hello, yes, please continue. Yes, please continue.
So in the literature, students are classified to solve this challenge Students were classified into different classes of engagement level using model build. Students were classified, for instance, into auditors, active, and qualified, applying a model. And the outputs of those models were also visualized. However, after classifying a learner as auditors, there may be large numbers of students in a part. So literature, they did not consider further classifying or filtering students in those categories. Moreover, the task of identifying the least engaged learners is another challenge, and we have not seen any work that such work. So this motivates us to propose a student engagement visualization dashboard that visualizes instantaneous engagement every minute, trends of engagement, and filters and displays the least engaged learner. And that dashboard, which we built, was based on student engagement prediction. And also, we performed validation of those proposed visualizers in a controlled experiment. From literature review, so in the literature, there are works like Hussein et al. They classified engagement levels into two levels, whereas Kofrin et al. Again clustered students into three. Now, that each category may contain large number of students. We propose prediction model that categorizes students into either of 4 categories: high, very high, high, low, and very low. And also, Liu et al. Used a 2-minute interval for updating. So they built a visualizer that visualizes by updating in a 2-minute interval. But our case, our visualizer updates every minute, which will provide the instructor visualize the least engaged learner after classifying the student into the 4 classes of engagement levels. The proposed student engagement prediction model. So we propose 4 levels. These are based on the works of Whitey et al. And Kaur et al. The labeling task was performed on video frame of 10-second length. We give number to rate each clip or video frame. So we give very low 1 to low 2. We give high level 3, and we give very high 4. 4 tasks were designed: viewing content, taking quiz, and submitting assignment were for behavioral features. Hosting to a discussion forum was a task for extracting collaboration features. And totally there were 13 features in 3 factors. So these are the 13 features. And finally, when we do the correlation analysis, we got 2 features correlating with very low engagement level. So we call them significant features. So 2 significant features for very low engagement levels, 5 for low, 10 for high engagement levels, and 9 for very high engagement levels. So we use these features to build the engagement model. Actually, the significant were 11, but we used 9 features which emerged in the final models. So this was the model with the range. So we used this one to predict engagement level into one of the 4 categories, so that we have visualized the predicted model, the predicted engagement. So the visualizer, we visualized instantaneous engagement every minute, which means we displayed the number of students with a particular engagement level every minute. And we use pie chart to visualize the instantaneous engagement level. So the sectors are, they correspond to the number of students in a particular engagement level. And the colors are, so we use dark red for very low, dark green for very high, light green for high, and light red for low level engagement level, so that a teacher will instantly observe the engagement levels of the student. And so this is for instantaneous engagement level. And we visualize trends of engagement level for the last 30 minutes. We use line graph to visualize the trend of engagement level. So we plotted number of students in the y-axis and time of visualization in the x-axis. So this was the trend engagement level visualization. So there are the 4 levels are here. So so the teacher can understand the trend of the engagement level very easily from this visualization. We identified the least engaged learner from a large number of students. So what we did was we counted the number of very low and low engagement states, and we sorted them. So the one with the maximum was assumed to be the least engaged learner, and the visualization was done using textual format. which was a list from Maza. We learned it from Maza Italo, of course. And we also evaluated, used 10 university students. They were volunteer students. And so we got this result. And the average score was 89.5. And the score indicates that the user satisfaction of the visualizer was high. So we concluded that this visualizer appeared to be useful for teachers during the learning process. Thank you.
In case of engagement learning, what policy applied for measuring the student learning capability?
Yes, sir. Yes, yes, sir.
Tell me what algorithm used for engagement learning for policy policy to measure student learning capability?
Sorry, sir. Could you repeat the question, please?
Again, repeat you. In case of engagement learning, so
yes,
how to measure student learning capability? Some student learn engage more than that. So I think you can't use any mathematical model or formulation used for measure that entire learning engagement learning capability, because any learning model or engagement learning or learning model, so that based on supervised learning. So what use, how to measure? Just
yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, we use the learning of the student should be measured. We use the score. If I can show you the features, one of the features is the score of the student. So we use, they have to take quiz.
Yes. So
yes.
So what feature?
So the learning through quiz, sir. So there are scores. So the score is the score of a quiz is one way of measuring the learning. Even we use this feature to predict the engagement of the students.
No, who create or who justify learn level 1 or level 2? That based on some mathematics, some equation or algorithm. What are you? Yes. What you use?
We use equation. Yes, sir.
You can't use any kind of formulation or model to measure accuracy in terms of student engagement learning, because in case of
sir, what we did was we made experiments, sir. So we made experiment.
Yeah, you not perform, not used any experiment. Okay. Just so review and present here. Okay, is a tabular data, and your if be my last question, if you want to know how to perform these on the basis of MATLAB or Python and any kind of tool, so how it measure, or just a tabular analysis and represent in terms of graph, pie chart or bar chart. Okay, ma'am, over to you.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, Mr. Abdul. Our next presentation is from Mr. Praveen Kalkundri. Sorry, a mistake pronunciation. And the paper title is a soft embedded course of for FPGA.
Am I audible, madam?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay, I'll start the presentation.
Sure.
Share the screen. Yeah, I hope the screen is visible.
Yes.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. This is Praveen Kalkundri from KLS Gupta Institute of Technology, Department of Electronics and Communication. So this work we have been carrying it for almost 4 to 5 years now, and based on few experiments, we found a few literature survey where, based on the applications, the soft cores classification was not there. So this was the need of the paper, where for which application, what software suits the best for on FPGA basically we are looking out for. So I'll start with the introduction. So what do you mean by soft IP? So soft IPs, IPs are basically classified into three major categories. One is the soft cores, then comes the firm core, then comes the hard core. So we are talking more about the soft cores only because they are more flexible, they are cost effective, they are reusable. So firm cores basically are like an architecture where you change few parametrics like IOs. Okay, you can modify the netlist little bit here and there. Hard cores, the architecture is completely finalized. You cannot change anything. Only based upon the timing information, you can work on the circuit level and a logical level, and you could do this. But soft IPs, you can completely change the netlist. You can work on the netlist. Okay, and few architectures are there. We'll see a few architectures which are available and how we can configure them on that. Okay, so one we can see here the three IP cores that are major classified. We can see the flexibility and the portability and the reusability is more maximum with your soft IP. As we move towards the hard IP, we can see that the cost also increases, the design efforts increases. Okay, so majorly we are looking at the soft IPs for flexibility, portability, reusability, and also the cost effective. So with this, we introduce the soft IPs. Okay, so soft IPs basically we are looking at the technologies which are cost effective, soft processors which are available, which are configurable, which can be reused. Okay, so for same applications or in an area of applications where we can configure based upon our needs. Okay, we'll talk about, I'll compare FPGA with the other device and I'll explain you what we are doing exactly. The key elements of these soft core processors are highly dense FPGA. Yeah, so with FPGA, we say that the same application can be carried out by a microcontroller. But why require FPGA? So for since FPGA are high density circuits, devices where we can have high computations with much higher clock speed. Okay, so the advantage of FPGAs are this. So there are IP cores which will help us sit on an FPGA and work for us. Okay, so the FPGA basically is, again, we can classify it as a processor. Basically, so we can use, basically the soft IPs can be configured as a processor or as a microcontroller also. So, like MicroBlaze we have, which can be used as a processor, or configure it and use it as a processor, again reconfigure it and use as a controller also. Okay, so major advantage, they're flexible, low cost, reusable, as I told you, and have a multiple processor system also that is available. So we can have a multiple system also on this. So we can see here that the design usability, we have the debugging with respect to the physical hardware changes that is required. So these IP cores basically they work on, they dump it on the FPGA, and we can see that they can adapt to the fabric that is present on the FPGA. So the basic classification that we can see here is the soft IPs that are present are S1 core, your Leon IP core, your OpenRISC either 1000, then it was the second generation which came with 1200. Then was the Neon 2, which was a Cortex, presently now known as Intel and NIOS 2 and 3. The new version is there. So the older version of Xilinx, which was given by PicoBlaze, and the newer version, which is the MicroBlaze, that we are more going to concentrate. So right now, in this paper, we have concentrated more on NIOS 2 and MicroBlaze, the head-to-head discussions we have done with respect to the applications with respect to these two. So the general classification is of the collection of the IPs, and over that, with the major which are concentrating in the industry are these two where we are looking at. So here we can see the comparison between FPGA and microcontroller. The same task can be done by a microcontroller or an FPGA. So why go for an FPGA? So we can see here majorly looks for parallel executions, whereas your controller will go for a serial execution, which is going to hamper for critical applications. Even if you require for RAM and ROM and any external storage devices, any devices externally that is going to be there. So the rapid development can happen with FPGA rather than the microcontroller, which is more flexible, being more flexible, in fact, microcontroller. So this is the architecture that we see that we have used for our purpose. That is the MicroBlaze architecture. You can see here we have the whole CPU almost like a core, complete core with respect to a memory management unit, with respect to the bus interfaces. So MicroBlaze is the 32 or 64-bit processor. You can call it a processor. Okay, so it's a processor. So with that, the instructions or the advantages of your MicroBlaze we'll see. And this is the architecture of your NOIS 2, which is an Intel NOIS 2, actually, to be very precise, the architecture. So when we classify these two, when we look at the comparison between these two, Intel NOIS 2 is core, is basically classified as economic core or a fast core, whereas MicroBlaze, they differentiate between three types. One is as a microcontroller, then as a real-time processor, and then as an advanced processor that is used for specially suited for complex applications and crowd-related operations. Whereas your NOIS 2, we will see that
sorry to interrupt you, sir. One last minute left for presentation.
Okay. Can I go to the conclusion, madam?
Yes, sir. Please conclude.
Yeah. So we can see here that with MicroBlaze, we are and NOS 2. The major difference between these two is Xilinx MicroBlaze. You will see that the users can configure the whole architecture into 70 different configurations, whereas with NOIS 2 it is not possible. The only ease is that the CPU instructions can be increased or can be given. So 256 user-defined instructions can be added into the architecture, in fact. But rather with respect to MicroBlaze, it is not possible. So with respect to any software development or any this, if you have any critical timing applications that are required into that has to be incorporated in the software. So Intel NOIS 2 or 3 would be a better option. But if you're looking for a highly configurable architecture with respect to the hardware, where you can look into sleep mode, hyper mode, and try to reduce the power optimization also, then your Xilinx MicroBlaze is one of the major contributions. This is just the outline of the comparison between the IP cores that we see here. So NOS 2, we can see we have compared with respect to the clock frequencies, the number of bits, it is 32 or 64 bits, which you can configure. Okay, pipeline, when we say pipelining architectures, both support pipeline architectures. It is either 3 or 5 with respect to MicroBlaze, and NOIS, it can go up to 6. Both are proprietary licensed software. But with NOIS, we have seen that every work that we carried out, we have to go for the licensing. Whereas MicroBlaze, we have able to cross compile it with LabVIEW and also with MATLAB. So that is where we see the flexibility with respect to the MicroBlaze that we have here. So with respect to the advantages of the soft IPs, we have seen that flexibility in terms of development that we see, time to market, it gives better. Okay, so low cost with respect to the FPGAs, high performance that is possible, customizable instructions or customizable architecture that we can see. These cores which are easily available with the software itself. So royalty free with respect to the software, you get it free. You do not pay any much for it. Okay, applications, it covers almost all the applications that we have. We have tried specific to be very specific. We have tried these with automotive applications. We are working with few automotive applications where we are using FPGA in terms of your microcontrollers just to get the best of microcontroller and the FPGA. Yeah. Thank you, madam. Hello.
Yes, sir. Just
yeah.
Hello. Audible?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Interrupt ISR means interrupt service routine handled by any solution through your FPGA technique.
Sir, they have their own, these IP cores have their own interrupt.
That is hardware failure.
No, sir, these are soft IP, sir. These are netlist, in terms of netlist, in terms of RTL, you can say, or you can, to be very specific, you can, when we cross compile it, we do it with either VHDL or Verilog.
Second, just I know what alternative of IP core used in FPGA. If we want to just know alternative of IP core.
Alternative of IP core, sir, IP core, hard IP cores, probably the controllers that we have, these are all hard IPs, sir. They come under hard IP. The present controllers that are there, they can come under hard IPs. Soft IPs are basically, it's like, we can say, on ARM, probably on ARM also, if I want to have an ARM controller, want to sit on an FPGA, I can directly write a code which behaves like ARM and dump it on FPGA and make my FPGA work as an ARM controller.
And my last question, CPU utilization measure with the help of your method. So you have mentioned or not? Just
so they have their limitations with respect to frequencies with selections that we have. It can vary, sir. Presently, we have worked with 40 megahertz also. We have seen microBlaze, we have used 40 megahertz. We have used 100 megahertz also. But the utilization again changes with respect to the frequency that we have used.
Okay, ma'am, over to you.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am.
Our next presentation is from Ms. J. Madhu. And the paper is an assured encryption strategy for private data protection in hybrid cloud.
Share my screen, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Hello?
Yes, ma'am. Please.
Ma'am, shall I share my screen?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, you can.
Okay.
Ma'am, are you facing an issue?
No, no problem.
Okay.
Madam, is it visible?
It is visible, but a window, not a PPT.
PPT is not visible.
Yes. The file has not been opened yet.
Ma'am?
Hello. Yes, ma'am. Please open the PPT.
PPT open. Resume share code. Madam, is it visible now?
No, ma'am.
Madam, is it visible now?
Yes. Please go ahead.
My title is an assured encryption strategy for private data protection in hybrid cloud. Myself, J. Madhupriya, doing PhD part-time Bharatdasan University. My guide is Dr. George Amalaratnam, who is a Bursar Director, MCA, Associate Professor from Jamal Muhammad College, affiliated to Bharatdasan University. We know that cloud computing is a model for enabling ubiquitous, continuous demand access to a shared pool of network services that we can rapidly provision and release with minimal management effort. There are obvious advantages of cloud computing. We have lower computing costs, improved performance, reduced software costs, updates, and device independence, and increased data reliability. We know there are various cloud models available, namely private cloud, public cloud, hybrid cloud, traditional IT. And my basic issue is building and security, improving the security for a hybrid cloud, which is a combination of public as well as private cloud. So the issues in cloud computing are privacy, compliance, security, and sustainability and abuse. Major cloud security issues have been classified as authentication, access control, data confidentiality, and data integrity. Why we need to go for the hybrid cloud? The primary need people moving towards hybrid cloud is agility. Because whenever business demands increases, we need to adapt and we might change our direction. That is a core principle, whatever business we run. And similarly, an enterprise may even want to combine public as well as private clouds. Because some data may be shareable, they may put it in the public cloud, while critical sensitive data, they may be stored it in the private cloud. So they need to have an hybrid cloud to cater into the growing needs of the business. So hybrid cloud is a composition of at least one private cloud and at least one public cloud. So it is basically offered in two ways. A vendor may have a private cloud and he forms a partnership with the public cloud, or a public cloud provider may form a partnership with a vendor that provides private cloud. And this is the hybrid cloud architecture. We have on-site private cloud, outsourced private cloud, on-site community cloud, outsourced community cloud, and we have a public cloud. So related work, I basically looked into 17 papers of my various researchers. Gurudutt Kulkarni discussed about the features of private cloud, namely protection, manageability, privacy, audit, and compliance. And Dr. George Amalaratnam suggested combined cloud model with public and private cloud for better security to the user's data stored in either clouds. Oduneyo segregates the user data into two clouds with non-essential applications in the public cloud.
Ma'am, your screen is not visible now.
Is it? Shall I continue from my literature review, ma'am? Okay.
Yes, continue from the where you were left off.
Yeah. Sorry for the inconvenience, ma'am.
No worries, please continue.
Up to 3 papers I discussed earlier. Jeff Malnick emphasized the components of hybrid cloud that include physical, technical, administrative layers. While physical layer deals with security of vendors, technical security describes encryption and VPN. Administrative security is about rules and procedures. Then Ratan K. Josh discussed about cryptographic methods for applying data confidentiality and integrity. He included methods like symmetric key cryptography, which is also called as public key cryptography. Abdullah Omar explained about hybrid cloud that combines public and private cloud. It is seen as an option for storing healthcare data. Priyanka Madiraju discussed about enterprise using a hybrid cloud to host their e-commerce website in a private cloud that is more secure and versatile. Blesan Verghese elaborated that according to estimates, 63% of cloud users have adopted hybrid cloud strategy with use cases reported in healthcare and energy sectors. Then Guru Aryatojo et al. Conducted an investigation. The aim of this project is to evolve, check, and install an HCDM, hybrid cloud data model, as a cloud infrastructure service. Then the open source software own cloud was introduced by Prakash Gopalakrishnan. This enables file integration and sharing in a secure manner. It used WebDAV, web distributed authoring and versioning. Yinglu et al. Took digital twin from concept to practice, introducing it as a precision simulation technology. The paper focused on cloud healthcare system design and digital twin healthcare. This is a cloud-based, novel, generalized, and extensible framework for monitoring, diagnosing, and predicting aspects of individual health. Vaishnavi et al. In their paper elaborated about the 4 deployment models: public, private, hybrid, community. The paper emphasized the advantage of hybrid clouds such as security, reliability, business coherence, and management. Ezineldin Hemadanat described the digital forensic approach to cyber crime detection in a private cloud setting using VMware's virtualization technology. An experimental setting was created. Sundarakani et al. Proposed hybrid supply chain cloud approach which combines infrastructure, tools, and platform configuration. This paper introduced a hybrid cloud to help with the supply chain network integration. Disaster recovery was first explored by Siham Hamada et al. It is a division of information technology that focuses on data security in the event of a disaster. It is a collection of procedures and tools for returning an object to normalcy following a catastrophic event. Chris Kandan discussed in their white paper on the power of hybrid cloud strategy, specified that security continues to be the top concern among the organization using public cloud, reported by over 2/3 of enterprises surveyed in this study. Hybrid cloud solution resolve security, risk mitigation, and trust issues. Anwar Ghani et al. Elaborated about cloud storage issues, data security issues, and data management issues in detail. The problem definition. Cloud computing is an advanced technology that poses severe problems in information management like data confidentiality, data integrity, unauthorized access, and insecure interfaces. So it is very much needed to protect one's own data. And hybrid cloud, being a combination of public and private cloud, requires stronger security measures. Therefore, design of efficient security algorithm using cryptography methods will be the ultimate choice for the critical data stored in private cloud. The proposed algorithm is SDE cipher. It does data at rest encryption. The encryption procedure of SDE cipher, the user's data, it should be the plain text. It is converted into binaries. We divide the total length of plain text into 128-bit blocks. SDE cipher takes the 128-bit binaries for encryption. If the plain text has more than one 128-bit blocks, then every 128 bits are encrypted. SDE generates a round number key, which denotes the number of rounds. And this is a block diagram of SDE cipher. We have a 128-bit divided into 64-bit LD1 RD1. We perform left circular shift. We do an XOR with subkey. Then we perform the XOR operation. Similarly, if the operation is carried out on the right-hand side, finally both are merged. We do a reversion operation. We perform one's complement and single round is completed. Features of SDE cipher. It is a 128-bit block cipher. It uses two keys. First key is a random number that denotes the number of rounds. Second key is a main key from where three subkeys are generated. So the algorithm is carried out in ASP.NET using C#. Simulation is executed in cloud environment, Windows Azure platform. It supports Active Directories, new virtualization, internet information. SQL Azure is a database used here. And this is the Windows Azure server settings. This is the user side settings. Experiment with the original text. I simply give a sample text for encryption. What is the plain text and what is the cipher text generated? Similarly, the result for decryption. And the simulation results, they are compared with existing algorithms. I took DES, data encryption standard, and 3DES. And this is the comparison chart for encryption time. And this is the figure which represents the encryption time chart. The next table is a comparison of techniques with respect to decryption time. And this is a decryption time comparison. Then observation. We say that proposed SDE cipher encrypts the data in the shortest time possible as compared to other techniques. It took the least amount of time to decrypt the data according to the results. So we use Ackman analyze, a security analysis level tool to analyze the security. We represent M as the size of cipher text from the cloud storage. I represents the plain text recovered by the attack. We use the formula P equal to M minus I. Here P represents the size of data recovered by the hackman, which are not mapped with the plain text. The formula for security level percentage is S equal to P by M into 100. Here S represents the security of the proposed encryption techniques in percentage, and insecurity level is given by IS equal to I by M into 100. IS gives the insecurity of each algorithm. So the
Sorry
table
to
3.
interrupt, ma'am. You've exceeded the time limit, so kindly conclude the presentation.
Okay, ma'am. Okay, ma'am. So this is the security level percentage, and this is the diagram. And the SDE cipher demonstrates the security in the private cloud is significantly improved. The private cloud is exclusively used for storing sensitive critical data. So important we have to implement stringent security measures. It is cryptographic algorithm are very much needed to improve security in private cloud. So it is an ideal approach for ensuring security in the private cloud. And these are the references I have followed. Thank you.
In case of comparison, you have a bar chart. So
yes,
how to measure accuracy of hybrid cloud in case of data production or trust?
No, sir. Hybrid cloud is a combination of public and private cloud, is it not? So we need a public cloud is something that a cloud where we can be storing data to share. But critical sensitive on-premise data, company's essential data will be segregated. They will be stored in a private cloud. So as such, if we choose a hybrid cloud model, where there will be a combination.
No. My question is that you have shown this graph. So on the basis of what expression used for finding that entire, So on the basis of these tables, so what expression are used? These are the tabular data which are used for representing finding that graph.
My algorithm is being used to securely store the data in private cloud. Security can never be compromised if the organization chooses a private cloud, especially as a part of a hybrid cloud environment.
Just tell me your implementation work.
I have my research area is hybrid cloud.
What tool are used for finding these graph?
Sir, I am proposing an encryption service which is to be deployed using Microsoft Azure. I have completed my public cloud service. and this will be a private cloud, and I will be proposing an framework.
Madam, just tell me your own work and find on the basis of some tool like MATLAB, Python, or Colnet, whatever.
Yeah, tool is not there. I have implemented the coding in Azure, Microsoft ASP.NET, and this algorithm is returned. So this algorithm will be deployed as a service, as a framework in the people who use to secure their data in a hybrid cloud environment.
Okay, thank you. Over to you, ma'am.
Okay.
Thank you so much, ma'am. So as we are done for the presentation, so moving ahead with our closing remarks, I would like to thank our authors for their excellent presentation and contribution in this session, and all our participants for being a part of this international conference. I hope this session was informative enough. All the presenters would be getting the digital certificates through email within 2 working days. Further, all the papers have been already forwarded to the Springer. The publication will be live within 5 to 6 months. So kindly cooperate with the team of ICT 4SD 2021. I also thank our session chair for chairing the session. A token of appreciation to the chair on behalf of Team ICT 4SD and Global Knowledge Research Foundation. Thank you so much, sir, for your valuable presence.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
So at last, I would like to request you all to on the camera so I can have a quick snapshot for our virtual conference.
Ma'am, I think
your camera is, yes, blurred.
Just
not visible.
Am I visible?
Yes. You are ready, sir, with your camera? Or, okay. Okay.
due to some okay, fine, ma'am.
No worries. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone. Stay safe. Take care.
Thank
you, ma'am. Thank you.